Take a seat. Okay. All right, welcome. Oh my gosh, that's so loud. Welcome to everybody to our session this morning. We're very happy that you joined us for our career guidance panel session. This morning we'll be discussing ethical dilemmas in the workplace, and I think this is a very important topic. I hope that you all are here because you also feel it's an important topic. I just wanted to give the brief overview that we actually provided for the session on the annual meeting website. I had found a quote online because that's what we do, right? We always look for quotes. Other people always say it better than we did. But the quote that I found said, "We have all experienced situations in which our professional responsibilities unexpectedly come into conflict with our deepest values. We are caught in a conflict between right, and no matter the option we choose, we feel like we've come up short." And I think this actually really embodies the topic that we want to discuss today. Because I think it's an inevitable part of not only the professional, but as young members, you're going to encounter this as well. And we've got a great panel of professionals here today to share their experiences. And I'd like them to actually introduce themselves. I think they'll probably do that better than I can. I'm going to start with our water bearer, Tim Harpst, in the end here. Tim, go ahead.
Got to have a good skill set. Well, good morning. My name is Tim Harpst. I'm currently with the consulting firm of Horrocks Engineers. I've also worked the majority of my career in the public sector, both at the state and mostly at the city level. I was the transportation director for the city of Salt Lake City for 25 years. I'm a past international IT president, and I also served 8 years on the Transportation Professional Certification Board. So I'm very happy to be here this morning.
Good morning. My name is Rosana Correa. I'm currently the IT International Vice President. I work at Jacobs Engineering as a project manager. I started my career, I went to the University of Puerto Rico at IOS, and I started my career in the Puerto Rico Highway Authority, and then moved to Tampa, but I've been here for 20 years, and moved on the leadership of Florida section, and now the IT International President, and my first time in the Western District meeting, so very glad to be here and very happy to share some of my experience.
Good morning. My name is Fred Minagar. I'm the president of Minagar and Associates, Inc., a consulting transportation engineering firm based in Orange County. I've been in the line of transportation engineering for the past 39 years, having engineered, planned, administered over 1,000 projects between New York and Hawaii, and South Korea, People's Republic of China, and Saudi Arabia. And I'm the two-term mayor of my home city, beautiful city of Laguna, Niguel in South Orange County, and also the two-term chairman of the Transportation Corridor Agencies of Orange County, also known as the Toll Roads of Orange County. And I serve all the coastal cities of South Orange County as the representative on Orange County Council of Governments and Southern California Association of Governments, which is comprised of 191 cities. We make all the allocation of funding that trickles down from Washington, D.C. to 191 cities in Southern California, including all these Coachella Valley cities. So with that, I'm very excited to be here because I used to serve as the chairman of the career guidance for ITE Med section of New York and New Jersey back in 1984. And when I moved to California back in 1989, I was the Westernite newsletter editor that we won the best awards for that.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Leong, and I am the Western District Vice President. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area section. I currently work at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency as an engineer and the acting pedestrian program manager. Been there for over 10 years.
Good morning. I'm Jeanne Acutanza, and I'm a senior transportation manager with WSP and Associates in Seattle, Washington. I started my career, like Fred, 39-ish years ago in Southern California at a time of really disruptive change We were coming out of a deep recession, so I'm sympathetic, empathetic to where people are coming into their careers today. My career has taken me from Southern California, where I was skyrocketed to, a position of authority very quickly because of, just because of the hiring practices before me. There was a lot of headroom and a lot of need for people like myself. So I moved up really quickly, but I've worked across the country, Washington, D.C., and now I've settled in Seattle, Washington for a number of years. I also volunteer in a lot of organizations. So I volunteered in the Transportation Choices Coalition, Transportation Committee in my home city of Washington. And I'm currently sitting on the Seattle Freight Advisory Board, so I definitely recommend volunteering, and I'm currently the past president of the Washington State Section.
Thank you very much, and I didn't introduce myself, but I'm your moderator today. My name is Cathy Leong. I'm actually from the Hawaii section, and I'm the director of the transportation group at Wilson Okamoto Corporation there. I'm currently serving as the district's LAC committee chair. I also serve on the IT International Equity Committee as the co-chair, but I wear a lot of hats. So I'm up here today participating in this career guidance session, and I hope you guys find this as beneficial as I did sort of doing the research and thought process behind putting this session together. So we're going to start out with some just questions for our panelists about their experience with ethical dilemmas in the workplace. But we do invite our audience members, if you have questions along the way, raise your hand. We definitely love to hear from you. We've got a great panel here to query, so please make use of their experience. So I'm going to start off with the basic question is I just wanted each of our panelists to share an experience where you had an ethical dilemma in a workplace where you feel you handled it well. And I'm going to actually start with Kimberly.
Dive into all the details, or just kind of share the dilemma first, and do we want to discuss with the group, or how would you like me to do this?
You can take the lead how you'd like to do it.
All right. So I think one of the dilemmas that young engineers have faced and that I've faced early on in my career was the concept of a safe design versus the safest design. So I currently work at a public agency where a lot of the work that you do is really informed by the public, by politicians and such. So one of the projects that I was working on was a bikeway design project. We wanted to upgrade a Class 2 bike lane to a Class 4 parking protected bikeway. Unfortunately, as we were working through this project, we were hearing that there were parts of the corridor where there were very specific loading needs that businesses had. And we were kind of caught in this space where we felt like, if we wanted to do a parking protected bikeway here in order to make everything fit on the roadway, we had to remove all the parking and loading on one side of the roadway to make this work. This meant that it was a 50% loss of loading for the corridor. Businesses in the corridor, however, felt like this was not something that their business was able to take on. And we were kind of caught in the middle of this as they were kind of going to their district supervisors, to the mayor and such, trying to figure out how to handle this design. Would you like me to continue further with this? All right. So one of the things that we had to take a look at was, how is the best way for us to adjust this design to make it the safe, well, let me see how I want to dive into this. So the dilemma that we were facing with here was that our engineers felt like the best thing for this corridor was to put in this parking protected design. And the reason was because there was a history of crashes that we were trying to address. A lot of our work is driven by Vision Zero, where we're trying to reduce the number of crashes, and fatalities are happening on our roadway. I'm trying to see where I'm headed next with this. Sorry, just taking a look at my notes here. Sorry, I'm just reading my notes. So ultimately, what we had to do was really work closely with the businesses to help them understand why we were pursuing this bikeway design. And we had to rethink our outreach process for how we were doing this work. So typically what we were doing before was a number of open houses where we just simply had people kind of show up, provide their feedback and such. But what we realized that for this work, we really had to have touch points where we're working directly with businesses to help them understand why we were pursuing this sort of work. Should I continue? Sorry. Getting very frustrated.
Okay, so let's refocus, Kim.
Questions.
You know, so what I did was I gave them all sort of like thoughts to think about as they conveyed their stories, and I think she's getting a little caught up in that.
Sorry.
That's okay. So I'm going to just bring it down to Kim. So why did you feel that this particular project was an ethical dilemma for you?
Well, we felt like it was an ethical dilemma because the way our work is driven is that we choose our projects based on the Vision Zero policy. That is something that our city has decided that we want to address. So with Vision Zero, we want to bring the number of crashes and fatalities in the city down to 0. And that was the reasoning behind this project. And we felt that the best design for this project was that parking protected bikeway design. However, businesses did not want that because they felt that there was impacts to the way they're able to do their operations. So we're kind of caught in this dilemma of, well, our city's policy is to do these safety projects to address these crashes, but this at the same time is hurting businesses economically. So that's where we were really caught in the middle of this.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I'm actually going to move on to Fred.
I have a completely different case study. About 24 years ago, I was serving as the contract city traffic engineer for one of the most affluent cities in Southern California. I don't want to mention the name of the city. When I was serving in that capacity, I received a phone call in my office from the mayor of the city that, Fred, I want you to come to the next city council meeting and make a favorable recommendation for installing a brand new traffic signal at an intersection that a bunch of ranch owners have been asking the mayor for that. I paused for a moment. I said, sure, Madam Mayor, I'm here to serve you and your city. We're going to analyze it. We're going to go based on, as you may know, ITE and California MUTCD code, which is the same, as federal code, to do the warrant assessment for the traffic signal. And I'm going to prepare the technical report and to assure you that I'm going to be personally involved in the data collection to ensure quality control aspect of it. So I sent my staff to go and do the data collection, and I went there to make sure that everything was done properly according to MUTCD code and the traffic signal warrant assessment. Once we analyzed the intersection, the subject intersection, we realized that the location was not warranted for the installation of a brand new traffic signal. So now, that was my ethical dilemma. The #1 person in the city, a very famous person that wanted to run for the state assembly and the state senate, I cannot mention the name, is asking me, and I'm the contract city traffic engineer, and it's called engineering judgment that I can use, I can exercise that. Those practitioners know what I'm talking about, to use that to warrant the signal. So at my office, I was just debating between, should I do it to overrule everything else that not warranted, not warranted, not warranted. But engineering judgment, as a registered engineer in the state of California, Oregon, Washington, New York, New Jersey, I can go on and on. Nobody can argue with me. I have that power, and I can finalize the memo. Then I woke up in the morning, I said, no, I'm not gonna do it. So I prepared the report, I sent it to the city manager as a kind of emergency type of agenda item, and I went to the city council meeting. It was jam-packed with all these rich ranch owners showing up that they were expecting me to go to the podium and just say, as the city traffic engineer, I'm making a recommendation in favor of the installation of the traffic signal. I did not do that. So I was very respectful of the mayor at the time during the meeting. She went crazy at the meeting. She looked at the ranch owners and she said, this is not acceptable. Lessons learned, then I talk about a bunch of other things there. Number one, I've done a lot of public hearings in New York. I'm used to people that curse at you in New York, many years ago, 30-some years ago. So I've learned that never ever take it personal. When you are dealing with the public, more so now in my higher capacities that I smile, I always say your points are well taken. Period. I never get involved with the interaction with the audience, never do that. And I always say with the legal counsel that it is not on the agenda, therefore we cannot discuss it because of Brown Act violation. So to go back to the case, so I said, Madam Mayor, with all due respect, in the state of California, you as a municipal corporation and you as the mayor of the city, you have the discretion to overrule my recommendation as a registered engineer in the state of California. It's quite all right. And then I looked at the city attorney and I said, Mr. City Attorney, I just want to remind you that if the city is a conditional statement, would be proceeding with the vote that was initiated by the mayor. God forbidden, if something goes wrong at the intersection, once you install the signal, it is going to be the full liability of the city as a municipal corporation. Then you're gonna go ultimately for out-of-court settlements, which I'm involved a lot on a lot of different capacities on the side of public agencies. Then the city's gonna lose the case because it was not warranted to start with. And then I concluded my comments. I sat down, she looked at other people, she said, you don't understand. This is a rich city. We have money. My people, my constituents, my voters want to see a traffic signal there, and this is America. We're going to proceed with a brand new traffic signal. And the other council members, the other four, initially they were waiting for my direction to see which direction I would be going, then they would be following my direction. But the way the mayor was just, maneuvering, it's called politics, and I'm very involved with that. They do a lot of wheeling and dealings on the decision-making aspect of it, not monetary. That, okay, you vote in favor of my case, and then I'm gonna take care of what you want next time. That's how it goes. Doesn't matter if you're in Seattle, Washington, or in New York City, or any cities in California. We have 484 cities in California. Doesn't matter. Politics is the same. People are people, and that's the way it goes. So it was done. They made a favorable decision based on what the mayor was putting on the floor, and everything was over. My contract was about to be renewed. The city manager calls my office. He says, Fred, I'm very sorry to let you know that you've done a great job for our city, but, we are not going to renew your contract with our city. I said, it's fine. We have so many clients all over, that's okay. Second, lessons learned, never ever compromise your reputation. All what you have as as engineers, and then later on professional engineers, that's what's gonna stay with you. It's not worth it under political pressure to do that. Sometimes it's very difficult, but you have to always, as an engineer, think long-term. Everything is long-term, especially you're at the beginning of your career. You want to make sure that you have a flawless type of, beginning. The foundation is very important. And later on, I saw the lady on and on. She moved up in California, and that's fine. And now, I moved up to, when in Sacramento, I always say hello to her and that kind of thing. But I think it is worth it in the long term, that you always subscribe to that. One other lessons learned that I want you to make a note of it is that if you're not in those high positions, you always write a memo to file. It is a very good practice. I've been teaching ethics in other places. Put a date and just describe the situation. Sometimes at your level, you know, you have a senior engineer, you have supervising engineer, you have principal engineer, you have manager of the division, you have director. You know, now that when I serve as the highest position, then I see how the system can be broken. You want to protect yourself. You're not in a position to scream or yell or quit your job. Don't ever do that. If your supervisor asks you to do something later on at the end of this panel session, I'm going to be talking about what you need to do it the right way. So on that note, just make it notes and type it and put it in the file with all the descriptions, who told you and what you did. Then you're off the hook. On the legality aspect of it, I serve as an expert witness on a lot of big cases. I always defend the public side. It becomes handy. When you get the position, and right now I have two cases separate for two other cities in California, that we are getting deep down into those technical memos between the staff. That somebody told them to do something and they did not do it because of the technical ramification of it.
Thanks a lot. There was actually a lot in that one story. I want to just kind of highlight a couple of things that Fred said. So this idea of engineering judgment, and actually I'm hoping Tim's going to talk a little bit about this too, but engineering judgment is something you're going to see in a lot of the technical manuals that you use. And depending on the situations you are in, sometimes that can be used to your benefit, but a lot of times it can be used against you. So that was a really good point, thanks a lot, because that's something that I think a lot of us encounter almost every day, this idea of, well, use your engineering judgment, aren't you the expert? And so that was a really great story, thank you very much. The other thing that Fred talked about is not engaging and being respectful, right? So learning how to handle the situation in a calm, non-confrontational way definitely helps to move the issue along. It may not resolve it, but I think it also prevents it from blowing up into something that you can't manage. I'm going to ask Tim to share his story next.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I'll definitely repeat what Fred said. He had a really good summary on several items there. One is you just do not take anything personally, especially if you're working on a local government level. That's really where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. Always protect your reputation. That's what you have. That's what makes you a professional. And so we don't want to do things and get pressured into things, and lay out and find a way to let those people that might want to turn things political or pressure into other decisions that might not be good decisions, to make sure that all the information is out there and you guard your reputation. If you lose your reputation, you're going to have a hard time getting employment in other areas as well. It will follow you. The memo to file is also very important. We do have engineering judgment, and that's a very important factor. If you decide to do something contrary to the manual on uniform traffic control devices or other maybe guidelines or standards or policies, you put a memo to file. I had a city attorney when I was working for the city of Salt Lake who told me, Tim, this is what the engineering judgment is for. This is why we hired you. You are the professional. You know better than anyone else. If you want to do something contrary to that, put a memo to file with your logic and your reasoning behind it, and we will back you no matter where it goes, if it's a lawsuit or anything else. So don't worry about that. Just do the right thing. My example is in Salt Lake, I had a 5-lane arterial. It had about a mile long, 17,000 ADT on one end and 21,000 average daily traffic volume on the other end. It was a 40-mile-an-hour road. It had been an arterial for decades and decades. And the only thing that led to the growth of volume on that street was that one end of it led to the University of Utah. So it grew, the volumes grew with the university. One side of that 1-mile stretch was basically a very large city park. The other side was residential, primarily rental duplexes for students. But there was one short stretch that had 10 homes that were owner-occupied single-family homes. One of the owners was a professional community organizer and political activist. And she really wanted to see the traffic volume or the traffic speed reduced and down to 30 miles an hour, as well as reduce the cross-section from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction. And she worked professionally, made her living at doing this, not only in the state of Utah, but in states like California and other areas. So she knew how to do all of this sort of stuff. She knew how to get people excited about things. She knew how to go political. She'd meet with city elected leaders and all that sort of thing. And she really got organized in the neighborhood and with our mayor and council about this. Well, one day we had a meeting, public meeting in that neighborhood where the mayor and council were there. And it was an open meeting, so this item was not on the agenda, but she got on the microphone and put her case out there and said, you know, I'd really like to see this go down to 30 miles an hour. We don't think it's safe. We've got a lot of traffic out here. It's harder to get across the road to the park and that sort of thing. And at one point, the mayor just looked at in the audience, and we had all the department heads there, and he goes, well, Tim, that sounds pretty reasonable. We can do that, can't we? And so I just sat there, and I got up and said, well, you know, what we'd really like to do is analyze this, look at it technically, and come back with a recommendation for you. And so that we were able to, that's what the part that worked out well. I think that we were able to avoid any snap decisions, because we also had a brand new mayor at that time who also was a political activist, and he tended to shoot from the hip a lot, which he did that night. So I was very fortunate to be able to kind of calm things down, give us a little time to go out and do the technical analysis. As a consequence, I'll just tell you what we wound up doing was we said, well, obviously, with that kind of volume of traffic, we just cannot take it down to 1 lane in each direction. This has been an arterial before any of these people ever bought their homes. They knew what they were getting into. Nothing has changed. There was a paralleling street that was single family, local, residential street at 25 miles an hour. And we said, if we narrow this street down to 1 lane each direction, this whole neighborhood's going to get nailed with all kinds of cut-through traffic. And by the time people started learning about that, there was an even larger growing audience that came in and said, yeah, we support keeping the 5 lanes. What we did do, however, is we found that we could lower the speed limit from 40 down to 35, and that worked out pretty well. And also we had 2 crosswalks that connected the residential area to the park. And we went in there and we beefed up what the presentation of those crosswalks were. We put in raised islands in a center turn lane area as a pedestrian protection, put up some flashing beacons and advanced warning markings on the roadway, and they were very well received. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. There was a couple of things in that story that I actually wanted to just highlight a little bit that I heard. Sometimes the problem in front of you is not just the problem in front of you. And I heard a comment about unintended consequences. So sometimes you need to look a little broader when you're looking at a problem, or when you have these issues or dilemmas. Make sure that you're taking into account all the factors. So I heard that. I also heard that there's more than one solution to the problem. Just because somebody tells you that the solution they want is the one that's right for that area, there's actually more than one way to attack a problem. Something to think about as well.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Tim.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go all the way down to the other end and come back to you. Being a very illustrious member of our panel, I'll let you go last. So Jeannie, how about you go next?
I think what I'd like to impart with somebody that is that our sensibilities change and have evolved over time. So from the time I graduated to now, the field has changed. Like Fred said, you really do have to follow the best practices of the time and the era that you're living in. But nothing is permanent. As we know, Fred mentioned MUTCD. A lot of these guidances, a lot of our perspectives on biking, as Kim was talking about, have evolved and changed. Where we might have talked about a shared lanes for bicycles, we might not talk about that anymore. We might not see that. And I think even with the federal government's...
Jeannie, can you just pull the mic closer to you?
Is that good?
Is it on?
Okay. And even from the federal government's perspective on safe systems, that's evolving and changing to say that, you know, we cared so much about crashes and crash incidences. Now we care about fatals and injury accidents, and that might change how we look at design and things. I liked Fred's discussion of the P warrant. I'll just remind everybody, the political warrant. That's what people think of when politicians think they can decide what is good for the state. My example is something similar. In the state of Washington, we come up with a long laundry list of improvements, like in a lot of states, and say, these are the investments we want to put out there. And the reason that list is the way that list is because some legislator that they need their vote has said, this is our top priority, this project is our top priority. And for that reason, they'll sign on to a gas tax or an incremental improvement. My dilemma was, after this list was vetted and thrown out to and voted on, and we're collecting taxes for an area of the state that's more rural, one of the investments is access to a winery. Who knew? A new interchange for a winery, which, like Fred would probably agree, not warranted, not going to meet the guidance. And if the access is to a federal system, the feds set the precedent for how you can provide new access. So the good part of the story, I guess from my perspective, I pushed hard to say, you know, we have to follow the guidance. The 10 wineries up there do not warrant a new interchange access onto a federally funded interstate. Not going to work. You will never get approval from the feds. But you wanted that investment. This investment should work for, you know, for this community. And I like to think of how these investments, these, you know, substantial investments tie back to the communities that they serve. Not just the businesses, but the businesses as well, because those businesses hire and employ, you know, all of the people that pay taxes. So my dilemma was to say, you know, we can't do this interchange right now, but we can try to find another kind of investment that supports the community. And I really encouraged the state and others. And I was really pushed hard. Can't that interchange work somehow? I was like, oh, I don't think so. Just not going to work. So that's my story. And things change.
Thanks a lot, Jeannie. And yes, things change. If anything, the last 2 years have shown us that, right? Things do change, and you're right. You know, I think that goes back again to the same thing Tim was talking about. Sometimes there's more than one way to solve a problem or satisfy the person you're talking to. Okay, Rosana, I promised you're next.
No,
so.
that's okay. I'm gonna go like a different route here, but I'm just gonna echo like what they say. You always do your job the best. I mean, your reputation carries over, so whatever in your situation you do, just do your job professionally. Remember that you have a long career, like that is what is gonna present you. So whatever you do, just treat people right, treat people with respect, the clients, your coworkers, and always summarize, you know, like put a memo or a summary of why decisions were made, take meeting minutes, what was discussed, because that will become important when you're discussing or going back to why a decision was made. But for me, my ethical dilemma, it was most personal experience. When I moved from Puerto Rico, I already have 3 years experience. I mean, like, it's not like I was super experienced, but I have worked some. So when I moved to Tampa, went to this place, and I was working in some signal timing project first, but then they switched me to do some traffic impact studies. And the supervisor at the time, he was not very, I was doing my work, but he was always saying, oh yes, your turn will come. I mean, you need to be like, you know, do this for the next 2 years or whatever, and then you can move up if you think that that's the best for you. So for me, it was like he was not, and then I have an accent. I mean, I cannot. I mean, I'm from Puerto Rico, so at the time he was not like, kind of, for me, felt like he was bullying my accent or my, like he was not treating me with much respect because I was coming from Puerto Rico and I knew I needed to learn the Florida things, but engineering is engineering, traffic engineering is engineering. But I kept doing my work and I keep delivering a good job. I mean, and so the company was growing at the time and they were like getting other type of projects. So I always speak up to the higher ups to say like, well, if there is an opportunity, I would like to get involved in something else. But I kept doing my job with this person, but, because it's your career. But eventually I moved up to another project in the company, and then I left the company. But it was, sometimes it's, and probably at the time I could have said something to HR or whatever, but so there are like situations like that might present to you. Just pick up to your next supervisor or HR, or put a anonymous complaint that you can do that as well, but seek feedback, but don't take anything personal, but always do your job, because that's the only thing that they can come against you, right? So just do your job and seek other opportunities if that person is not working with you. So.
Thank you, Rosana. I think we heard a lot of comments, and although in some scales we were talking about very big projects, lawyers, litigation, many of the things that were talked about in the stories that were shared, you can apply those things to your working world, right? Substitute mayor with the CEO, substitute, I can't remember who the higher up was was it a mayor too? Mayor, right? That's just somebody that's in a position of authority that's trying to tell you to do something that you may not feel is right. So a lot of the stories, you can translate them down into your own personal working world, but it's also great to hear stories about things you might encounter as you go out in the working world and have to interact with other people out there and work on projects. So for the most part, we've kind of shared a lot of stories about how things in the end turned out well, right? Everybody had but not everything. Just go ahead.
So I'm really passionate about bike and pedestrian safety, super involved in visions or advocacy and stuff. And as you may know, there is a lot of community against making these improvements and implementations, with the community pressure being for, say, defending parking, or defending a loading zone, or defending higher speed limits, and something of that nature. And generally, there can be a lot of opposition even within even city staff or city council that may not understand the need for these improvements. And holding your ground in such a case may risk your career or may risk your reputation with the city, even though the year of engineering and judgment may hold up, in a sort of more. I'm asking you sort of what situation, in addition to the loading zone question, you would experience that you work as
Thanks so much for trying to redeem me after I got all flustered earlier. So some of the other issues that we've kind of encountered, on these sorts of projects, actually with that same protected bikeway project, another thing that came up was that we were in front of schools where children would have to be crossing the bikeways or being dropped off. And we had to work really closely, with the businesses, with the schools and such, to come up with creative engineering design. So we actually had to test out some new ideas, and this is where that note to file documenting what it is that we're trying to do. And one of the things that we committed to was actually a very iterative process where we put in a design, we document it, we have, engineering drawings and such on record, but we're going back continually collecting data, working with the businesses, working with the schools to continue tweaking the designs. So specifically, with the school, they were concerned that elementary school students would not know how to safely cross a parking protected bikeway and would get hit by a cyclist. So we were actually out there for the first couple of weeks that the project opened. We were collecting data, and from our evaluation 6 months later, 12 months later, we saw that there were no close calls between students and the bikes. But with these sort of things, we're trying new things, and what we like to do in the city is have a very iterative process, continually working with folks. And once we've done it here, we're now applying that design that we have for the schools. We're using it on other corridors, but somebody had to be the first one to say, no, we're gonna do it here, we're gonna try it, we're gonna work very closely with you, we're gonna collect the data to make sure that this works.
Wait, I just want to add something. So Kim is very bashful, and she didn't talk about some of the negative pieces with that project, but I've known Kim for a while. For her, I think this project is something that she didn't share is some of the ethical dilemma for her in that project. There was a lot of public pressure, a lot of negative public pressure, and in this day and age, it's not necessarily just a public meeting, it's not a hearing. She had people openly attacking her personally on social media outlets to try to get them to change the project. So that's a way that you might find yourself in a situation that's unusual in a traditional sense, where they're trying to get you to do something that may or may not fit what your judgment tells you should do. And so, Kim, I just wanted you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I was really flustered earlier, but I'm feeling much better now. So thank you for the opportunity to chime in again on this. So for this project, we found out that we had to accelerate this project through an announcement from the mayor publicly. So I was not even told as the project manager that I had to accelerate this parking protected bikeway project. We were only in the conceptual phase, so we were just kind of talking to the public generally about the idea, like, what if we just did a parking protected bikeway in this corridor? What do you think? It's going to be 5 years down the road. Little did I know that the mayor was going to have a public announcement saying, this was in September, she said, we're going to have this parking protected bikeway project out there by the end of the year. That's 4 months that she gave us to do this project. Our legislative process in the city, from the time that you hit public hearing to the time it gets to the board, takes about 3 months. So she wanted us to do outreach, design, and get this all out there within 4 months. So that was part of the pressure that we were facing, where we know how to do a parking protected bikeway design, done it many times, we can put it on paper. But the moment that it went out, we were getting so much pushback from the schools, from the businesses, and we're like, well, how are we gonna meet this deadline, make this design work, and make everybody happy? In the end, we stuck with the design. We're like, we're going to do it. The mayor told us to do it. We know this is a safe design, but we're going to have a number of people that are mad at us. So when we actually went in front of the board, what we thought was going to be a very quick hearing turned into a 2-3 hour hearing. We had the schools show up. We had parents that were bringing their kids. Some of them were against it. Some of them were for. We had some folks that were getting to school on their e-bikes and such. But we had a large number of people show up saying, you're going to kill our kids. They're going to get hit by a bike. And it was insane how this went down. But we stuck with the design. And again, we worked closely with folks even after the project was put in to make sure the designs were working. We had to add additional signage to this loading area for the school where the kids were getting dropped off. We continued adjusting the color of the curbs outside the businesses to make sure it was meeting their loading needs.
So you hear that again, right? More than one solution. Okay. Yes.
So, I guess you all I was wondering, and you all made really good decisions, right? But if someone pushed back and even went to court and sued you, are there laws protecting an engineer in place, or how do you do it?
Oh, I think this is a Tim question.
Well, I hope I understood it correctly. Let me try to repeat your question. It involved, is there any legal protection for some of the actions you're taking? Generally, yes. The answer is yes. Most governments have either partial or even total immunity in certain cases. And I mentioned earlier, when I was with the city of Salt Lake, we had a city attorney who very definitely would back us as long as we said, put in writing, okay, here's why we're not doing what might be in a guideline or a policy. So you do have those kinds of protections. And even more so, if you're in a public meeting, particularly at a local level, and if you're a local government traffic engineer, those meetings always have a city attorney present. And the reason for that is if the council or the mayor in that meeting start discussing things and getting into areas, and I'm sure Fred has had this happen before, that they probably shouldn't be talking about, or maybe they're saying things that they shouldn't be, it's the job of that attorney to interrupt and say, you know, here's a situation here, you shouldn't be talking about this now, or whatever the case is. And so there are protections before you get into those situations if you have a good city attorney at a local government meeting. But then there are also these protections for you as long as you show that you're using your engineering judgment. I had one city council meeting, I'll just very quickly say that I was there for an item on the agenda, but there was something else, and all of a sudden the council members started talking about a traffic issue. And the two of them were going back and forth and saying, well, we think this ought to be done and this ought to be done. Finally, a third council member looked over and said, well, excuse me, but you know what? We probably shouldn't be trying to be a traffic engineer. We have a professional traffic engineer. We hire these people because of their knowledge, and we don't want to try and make decisions that could come back with liability against the city. So sometimes you get really good support that way, but you do have protections.
I'm going to add something because I think a lot of the perspective we've had here is public agency. I'm not from a public agency. I'm a private consultant. I think I'm just going to add a little bit to what Tim says. It depends on where you live. Okay, I do think that where you live, different states have different rules, and the way that the rules are written up provide different protections if you work for a public agency within that state. So you should definitely familiarize yourself if you work for that public agency with what their rules are. But in general, if you work public or private, they have attorneys, so that you're right. There's going to be somebody there that's going to defend it. But I have to go back to what Fred said. Always document what you do. It's inevitable. You're going to end up in some kind of a lawsuit. I've had to do a number of depositions because there's lawsuits. You can't stop somebody from suing you. All you can do is make sure that when you're doing your analysis, when you're making recommendations, does it have technical merit, and then did you document it? And I don't think that changes depending on where you work. So I just wanted to add a little bit of that perspective. I hope that answers your question. Did it answer your question? Okay.
I echo, yeah. Yeah, no, because I'm in the private and not most public experience, but yes, document, because yeah, we have people like trying to put a lawsuit against your project or how you design, so document everything, and you have like to keep your records for like certain number of years. I mean, depending on the state that you are as well, so just familiarize yourself with those.
Yes.
I've got a general question the place I went to middle school, it's on a moderately sized arterial road, 5 lanes wide, but just south of the school, it narrows down to 3 lanes wide. The county in which I live had a project on the rest of the road. During the planning phase, one of my friends that was a student was hit by a driver on his way to school. Now, the planning process of this project has already passed. As a middle school student, I didn't really know much about this. So later on down the road, things happen. I show up to meetings, ask for modifications, safety changes, and they say, this has already been decided 5 years ago in middle school. We can't make any changes. Now, this is an issue I probably couldn't have changed myself, but I'm sure there were concerns within the Department of Engineering or the Public Works Department at the county saying, hey, the student got hit here, maybe we should make these safety improvements. Now, something happened which resulted in the safety improvements not being made, or the design not being changed or remaining the same. Now, if I was in the position of the engineer doing the design, and I recommended such change, and a superior of mine told me that this has been decided or we can't do this, what courses of action do I have to say I cannot stand behind this decision, I will not put my name on this project?
That was a really long lead up, but I understood your question by the end, so that's great. Did everybody hear what he said? So his question was, when you come in on the tail end of the project, but you as the engineer on that project don't agree with the decisions that were made as far as what the project was going to do, what avenues do you have, or what should you do as a professional in that situation? So I'm going to actually go to Fred first for this one.
Well, I wanted to talk about this thing at the end, but I'm going to talk about it right now to respond to your question. I have a chart for myself. Anytime I need to make a decision, I go through this thing very quickly. Number one is the decision that I have to make, is it legal? That's number one. The most important thing, is it legal? Yes or no? Then I'll go to the second one. Is the decision ethical? Yes or no? I make that decision. Third, is it moral? Yes or no? Then, is it political? It is very important. Of course, the higher your position, the more you have to deal with that. I've been in this line of business for 39 years, and I've learned it the hard way by moving up the ladder, corporate ladder and public ladder, both of them at the same time. So once you meet all those criteria, then you know the solution's going to be known. The other thing is that to answer your specific question, if I were you, what I would have done, well, there's a chain of command in any organization, public or private does not matter. When this project has this kind of goal, objective, you have to move along with that. Unless technically you open up the manual or a code or a standard says otherwise, you have to proceed with that. You have a job to do. You cannot just let it go and just, you don't like it globally, you can quit. But without doing that, what I'm suggesting, you have to proceed with that. If technically it's sound, you proceed with that. It's a matter of choices. Sometimes I do a lot of things that I may not like personally, but I have to look at the people that I represent, or I have to look at the well-being of the society, and I have to look at other criteria to make that final determination.
Thank you. Actually, that was a great answer. Does anybody have anything to add to that? Jeannie?
I would add that hopefully in that chain of command that Fred was talking about, if you're coming in on a project and you don't agree with it, first thing you're going to do is talk to your supervisor or the engineer in charge of the project and have a discussion. And typically, I think way more often than not, you're probably going to come to a realization where the supervisor is going to say, okay, we're not going to have your name associated with this. You're not going to be signing documents and that sort of thing. And then that engineer, the supervisor, can decide where to go from there, because that person is in charge of the project. If that's not the case, then you might want to put a memo in the file on what your aspect was on the project. And you can choose your words the way you want to put in there, and it doesn't have to be disparaging against anyone. It can just say, that you look at this part of the project and you think this ought to happen based on out of your study from the manual or whatever the case would be. But I think more often than not, you're not going to really run into an adversarial situation.
And I was going to add to that, probably talk to that person, supervisor, understand why the decisions were made at the time, because you came at the tail end of the project. Maybe there were good reasons, and maybe it's a good project, but you can talk to them about what we can improve this project, and maybe it's not that phase, but later on you can implement other things to make that safer. So you open that conversation to, we're gonna go this way, because that was, but it was not going to cause any more issues, but then we're open to have that conversation, and maybe can be another safety project, coming after that project was implemented. So just have that conversation, and just, like you say, put a memo to file, but it's going to be like you can understand what the decision was made, and maybe that your supervisor is open to have another second phase of that project.
I think I'm going to add too, that it kind of depends on what your role is in the project, right? If your role in the project is to sign all the drawings, that might be an ethical dilemma. Because if you don't actually feel that the project itself is safe or technically correct, like what Fred was saying, right? That's where you have to think about what is your role. If your role in that project was you're going to deliver plans to all the agencies to make sure that they have a copy, I mean, that might be, again, it depends on how are you integrated into that project. And I think Fred was very right. There's going to be times, there's going to be times in your career where you have to work on projects that you may not like, right? That you're going to have to work with people you might not like, right? But the key is for you is, are you, in your personal space, are the things you're doing technically correct? Are they ethical? Like Fred was talking about, go through that checklist. And when the answer to those questions is no, that's when you should start talking to your supervisor. But again, that may not apply to all situations. In the situation that you were talking about, how did they come to the decision about what they implemented? If you don't understand the entire history of how they came to the decision, it might also be that you didn't understand the situation of what they assessed as well. So just make sure you have all the facts, right? Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Very thoughtful questions. Very interesting conversation. I think as we head into, I think we're in the final 20 minutes of our session here. I do want to come back to our panelists. I kind of asked them to think about two additional things, all right? So I'm going to ask each of them. I'm going to start down there with Jeanne, because we haven't heard from her for a while there. But I'm going to start with Jeanne. The two things I asked them to think about are, what are the most critical ethical dilemmas being faced by young members? So you guys. And to share a piece of advice on how to deal with ethical dilemmas. So I'm going to start with Jeanne down there in the end. Jeanne?
Great. Thank you. So I think some of the things that you're facing today are really related to a shift. You are at while we've done great work, some of us that have been in this industry for a long, long time, we're seeing some shifts and we're seeing some changes in perspective. For example, I was on a panel and realized while we care a lot about the 100 people who die from gun violence every single day, that's the same number of people who die in traffic fatalities. And we should care just as much about that. So I think I care a lot about safety, and I'm going to go into a short story. When I'm on the freight advisory board I mentioned, and I don't always feel, and we have other modal boards, bike board, transit board, pedestrian board, and sometimes I feel like I'm not, our freight board feels sometimes like we're outside of the circle of what might be the norm within the city of Seattle, which is very bike and pedestrian friendly. But my job is really on that board is to protect the integrity of these truck streets, major truck streets within the manufacturing industrial center. And the manufacturing industrial center, we've talked to business owners, and within the city of Seattle, that is where those family wage jobs go to people of color, immigrants, BIPOC communities. So those are family wage jobs for people who don't have a college education, and we want to keep them in the city. And so I'm always at this other side of we want bike lanes everywhere. So, I've had a dilemma in that, and trying to work through that with other modal boards with the desire to turn freight lanes, truck freight lanes into bike lanes. And I could tell you a long story about that. But I think the other thing is to bring, be honest, try to avoid the politics or the quick statements. I have had my words used in social media in ways that are not very flattering. But my dilemma is, just really trying to be honest, trying to bring forth other voices, trying to make sure that people's voices are heard, and trying to listen, actively listen, And I think in that way, you can find a space or find a place that it works for a situation.
Thank you, Jeannie. I'm going to go down here to Tim. What are your final words?
Thank you. Well, as far as what are the most critical ethical challenges faced by young members, I think they're the same for all of us, regardless of how long we've been in our career. And that is, I would recommend that none of us do anything that goes beyond our level of expertise. Now, it's not to say that if you've got a new project and you haven't had much experience in one area, that you can don't work on it, because you can always do research and learn as far as you go. But you will understand just what you're comfortable with and what you aren't. So it's a comfort level situation. If you start getting into areas where you're not comfortable, that's why you've got supervisors and co-workers who can help out and that you can go to and learn, and things will work out. So it's a comfort level to not go beyond your level of expertise. In terms of other advice that I would give, in terms of dealing with ethical dilemmas, I have one word, it's called empathy. I really think that we need to practice empathy. I did it early in my career and found that was the best thing I ever did. And no matter what the issues were, what you do is you put your feet in the shoes of all the folks you're dealing with, whether it's a homeowner, a city council, a planning commission, a mayor, a consulting firm you're working with, a coworker. Find out where those people are coming from and try to understand where they're coming from. And that will help guide you in how you will treat them and discuss the issues with them.
Thank you, Tim. Rosana?
Yeah, I think you're gonna face a lot of, you're passionate about a project, like try to make sure you keep working what you do, but you can be passionate about a topic, and we all like safety, we're passionate about safety, and I think everybody in the profession, regardless if they are not share your own opinion, they all want to create a safe space for everybody. Just just communicate, respect each other's opinion, and it just take like communication. Just maybe your perspective, they're like looking in a different way, but at the same time, they want to get to the same specific goal. So just communicate. Don't try to respect each other's opinion, and communicate. And empathy is a good way, but communicate. You can do a lot with communication, and just try to put in other people's shoes and try to do the right thing.
Thank you. Fred?
Thank you. On this one, I just have one item that I wanted to focus and zoom upon it. And that is, I have a lot of engineers that work for me in my private company. And when they ask them to do research or to prepare a report, when it comes to me for the final review and the signature, I say, wow, it's so well written and it's well documented. I say it cannot be done by this newly graduated engineer from UC Berkeley that is working for me. With all due respect, my two kids went to UC Berkeley, so
Go Bears.
go Bears, Golden Bears. So nowadays everybody uses the internet. Nowadays, when you want to do a traffic impact study for the city of Las Vegas in Nevada, even us in Southern California, we have access to tons of reports. People have tendencies of retrieving, copying, pasting, and you have deadlines. Don't do that. I started my career 39 years ago in New York City. I had to go to the Public Library of New York, search through a lot of things to find out 5% of information. At the end, I was left as an engineer. I had to come up with the idea and everything. You guys are very lucky that you have the internet, Google at your disposal. But please be cautious of that, because there are a lot of ethical and ultimately legal issues associated with that. You can't just take somebody else's report, oh, it's well done, let me copy that, this. Whatever you do, I always tell my staff and my two kids as well, source of where you got it. Citations. Give credits when credit is due. It's very, very important for those of you that are in the transportation planning arena more than design. Design, well, you have to, you know, design it. It's not the issue of copying, I mean. But reports, a lot of people do that. And it's pretty much common, but I'm totally against it because then, you know, you lose that sense of being creative and, you know, taking credit for that.
Thank you. That's a really good point. Wikipedia is not a legitimate source, yeah? FYI. All right. I'm going to end with one of our 2022 Young Leaders to Follow, Kim.
So I'm going to take this in a different angle. Something that I've been experiencing more and more with my work is the equity piece of our projects, which at times poses an ethical challenge. You know, quite often the projects that we're pursuing are in areas where people are most vocal. You have that one squeaky wheel who keeps calling you over and over again about that stop sign. But meanwhile, you have a community that, you know, we haven't done very much investment in that community. So one of the things that we've been rethinking a lot in our agency is how do we better serve the entire city? And that's where that equity piece comes into play. It's like, should we just keep focusing all of our resources on that one community that's always getting investments, or do we need to rethink how we're approaching our projects? And then when you drill that down to the project scale, how are we choosing to engage with people? Is it good enough that we just do our typical open house, put up some boards and tell you this is the project and just move on? Or do we need to think about how we are approaching conversations with other communities within the city? So that's something that's been coming up more and more. It's a really, you know, hot topic right now, but I think it's going to remain. So that's definitely something you're all going to encounter. And then this is just a little bit more just for our young members. You know, I definitely face this. I was actually going to share this about a situation I handled poorly. I know that we don't have much time, but you know, early on in your career, when you first get your PE or your TE licenses, you're so excited. You just want to stamp all the things. And, you know, I'm happy to share the story later on if anyone wants to talk about it. But pretty early on, we were working on a grant application, and they just needed an engineer. They're like, this is nothing. It's just a small engineer's estimate. We need your stamp. Really think about it. Like, I know you're excited to stamp things. I know you're excited about your PE, but really think about what it is that you're being asked to stamp and what that means years later on. I'm still dealing with a grant application that I helped with 5 years ago. Happy to dive into that a little bit later on. But one piece of advice for you is to really speak up, to share your opinions. If you're feeling a little uneasy about something, find someone that you're comfortable talking to in your office, find that mentor. That's something I should have done when I was being asked to stamp something, you know, many years ago. I was like, I don't know if this is the right thing for me to stamp this. Let's talk about it. Maybe someone more experienced should be reviewing this and stamping it. But definitely don't be afraid to share your opinions and to speak up. You know, trust that gut feeling of yours. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't the right thing for you to be doing at the time.
That's so funny. I think a lot of young engineers, the first time they get their stamp, what do? They stamp things just to see what it looks like. Although I think nowadays, maybe you guys don't have physical stamps. I still have a physical stamp. I think we all have physical stamps, but I think many of the younger engineers these days don't actually have physical stamps, which is too bad, but that's what we do, right? You stamp the insides of all your books, and anyway. We heard a lot of great points in the discussion today. I hope you guys learned a lot. I did want to point out that some of the things, like what Tim was saying, it ties directly into emotional intelligence, which you also did a webinar at the district level about. That webinar is actually available on the Career Guidance resource page, and it does tie into a lot of the things that we've talked about here today, okay? Communication, empathy, those sorts of things. So I encourage you to go to the Career Guidance webpage on the district website and definitely take a look at that panel session. We recorded it and posted it because I think you might benefit from it as well. Is there anything else that our panelists would like to add before we close? No. I do want to thank our panelists. We were so lucky that we had such great resources to put this panel together. I do want to thank Jenny Tapat. She's our Career Guidance Committee Chair for coordinating all of the events today, as well as the social yesterday. She's done a great job. She's silent over there. She likes us in the back, but we do appreciate her efforts, and we hope you guys enjoy the rest of the events for today. Don't forget, we have a mighty race later, right? And a student traffic bowl. So we look forward to seeing you guys all there. Good luck to all the schools that are participating as well. Thanks again to Tim, Rosana, Fred, Kim, and Jeannie. We really appreciate your input. Thank you, guys.